In April 1999, during a 2-week rampage, 22-year-old David Copeland embarked on a murderous campaign to maim and kill on the streets of London.
Until we caught him, London was always going to be at risk.
As the clock ticked, the body count rose.
The effect of the explosion would be even more devastating than the other 2 attacks.
And with it the question, why did someone so young wage a killing spree against the capital?
When a second device goes off almost exactly a week later, then you do quickly start thinking, is there a link?
Because he fundamentally hated anybody who wasn't him, he wouldn't run out of victims to target.
Using the killer's own words,
could you please explain to me, when you made these devices, what your intent was?
We find out why.
Murder, mayhem, chaos, damage, get on the news. Top story, really.
A vast, sprawling area covering approximately 670 square miles of southeast England, London is home to over 8 million people from all over the globe. With a diverse mix of cultures, religion and wealth, spread throughout a network of districts, this vibrant city is continuously alive to the hum of its inhabitants. But during the afternoon of the 30th of April 1999, the buzz of London's lively Soho district was about to be silenced. As another busy week came to an end, workers had begun to descend on the many bars and clubs the popular area had to offer, celebrating the start of the weekend.
It was actually quite quiet that evening for a Friday night because it was very sunny outside and very warm for the first time that year.
A popular place to unwind was one of Soho's oldest pubs, the Admiral Duncan.
It was a very long, narrow pub, low ceiling, wood panelling. It reminded me of like a Cornish smuggler's pub down on the coast.
The Admiral Duncan on Old Compton Street had been trading since the early 19th century. In recent years it had become a popular gay bar. Small and intimate, it was known for its friendly and welcoming atmosphere and would often fill up with drinkers early on a Friday afternoon.
I was later than I normally would have been for a Friday night, and I was meeting 2 friends. There was quite a few people who were drinking after work, a few people in suits. There was people who were on their way to the theatre, having a pre-theatre drink there, so a very mixed bag.
But on this afternoon, the clientele were unaware that only minutes earlier, an individual had been drinking amongst them, whose sole intention was to cause enormous harm to everyone there. "6:35 p.m. Inside the Admiral Duncan, a black bag lay at the feet of those drinking at the bar. It had been placed approximately 20 minutes earlier.
I actually stood right at the back of the pub, which was my usual sort of bolt hole, just beside the jukebox. And Robbie Williams' Millennium, that had just started. It only lasted for about 6 or 7 bars when the bomb exploded. I didn't actually hear a loud bang, just a blue flash, and then an odd sort of noise as if kind of like cabling was being ripped out of the ceiling.
Within a matter of minutes, the upbeat, happy atmosphere had been torn apart, replaced by a bloody scene of carnage.
As I got here to the junction of Tisbury Court, I looked straight down and I could see smoke billowing towards me.
Photographer Chris Taylor was only streets away when the explosion happened and managed to capture images of the immediate aftermath.
While I originally thought it was a big fire, I realised that it was an explosion because people were panicked so much. Now I could start seeing devastation and what was happening. That I could see bodies, everybody was moving, I could see, but I could see some horrific injuries, and if these were the people that were outside, I just could only imagine what had happened inside and how bad it was.
The first thing I knew was it was pitch black. There was smoke swirling around, strong smell of sulphur.
The bomb inside the black bag had been packed with hundreds of nails, which had ripped through the small space.
The smoke was so thick you couldn't even see the street, even though it was sunny outside. And I can remember thinking I might not see my parents again.
I can remember as I wandered up the street how eerily quiet it was. But the closer I got, there were people shouting and screaming and people asking for help.
One of the first on the scene to attend to the injured was medic Andy Wappling.
There was glass, there was rubble, there was wood, there was people. There were people mixed in amongst that debris. And I turned to what was the Admiral Duncan, and it was a black hole.
Three people were killed by the explosion, including a woman who was 4 months pregnant at the time. 4 lost limbs, and 70 others were injured. The bomb left to detonate inside the Admiral Duncan pub had been the third explosion in a series of similar blasts across London over the past 2 weeks.
The devices were all made exactly the same. The explosives, the nails, the plastic box, the holdall, the timing mechanism of the clock, it's all exactly the same.
In a hotel room just a few miles away, the man responsible for building and planting all 3 bombs turned on the TV. 22-year-old David Copeland watched as the news channels reported live on the chaos caused by his devastating spree.
Because he fundamentally hated anybody who wasn't him, he wouldn't run out of victims to target, and he would keep going until he got caught.
During 2 weeks in April 1999, London's emergency services were put to the test as a ruthless spree killer sent a wave of terror through the nation's capital. 3 massive explosions in 3 different locations ripped through the city's streets, injuring over 100 people and tragically killing 3 others. The devastating bombs were the work of just one man, 22-year-old David Copeland. But why had someone so young masterminded such a ruthless killing spree, designed to kill and maim, spreading fear and panic across London?
Could you tell me, please, why?
I knew that people would be hurt, people would be killed, but I had to do it. I just wanted to ease my mind. I just had to do it. It's my destiny.
On the 15th of May 1976, David Copeland was born in the West London suburb of Hanworth. The middle child of 3 brothers, he was noticeably different from his siblings, being significantly smaller than both, causing an early inferiority complex.
He wasn't very outgoing, he was shy and withdrawn sometimes, so he felt massively inadequate relative to everybody else.
From the age of about 12, he'd begun to have dreams of violence. He apparently dreamt of killing his schoolmates. He also dreamt of coming back reincarnated as an SS officer. And there seems to have been a strain of violence that was running through him like a sort of submerged river, never quite bubbling to the top. We do know that nobody at the school had any memory of him at all. He made absolutely no impression on the school or on the staff.
I think it's possibly safe to say that because he was such a nondescript individual who didn't stand out in any way to his peers and his teachers, perhaps that's a sign that he was truly a blank slate.
Still small in stature and with few friends to protect him, Copeland remained a shy and reclusive student, marking him out for bullying. With no one to confide in, his festering inner thoughts remained largely undiscovered.
He was an individual who didn't explode and erupt that other people could see, but he harboured that resentment and anger, and that fueled his fantasies into the extreme direction they took.
The 17th of April 1999, 11 a.m. Farnborough, Hampshire. 7 hours before the deadly spree began, in his bedsit, 22-year-old David Copeland completed the final stages in the construction of a 4-inch pipe bomb.
Up to 1,500 nails had been put in the bomb, turning it into a lethal concoction.
What did that mean to you, putting nails in the bomb? It made you smash windows out, stick into people, maim people, kill people.
With the target in mind and the device fully prepared, Copeland placed it in a black bag and cycled the 1.5 miles to Farnborough station. There he boarded the first train to London. 3 p.m. Having arrived at Clapham Junction, Copeland hailed a taxi and headed to his intended target, the district of Brixton.
So this is where David Copeland first arrived by taxi, and after being dropped off, he decides where he's going to go, and then he walks off in the area over here.
Brixton market on a Saturday afternoon is busy, lots of people there. It's also a main thoroughfare going into central London.
Copeland spent some time in the area looking for the perfect spot in which to plant his deadly weapon. His intention, to create maximum carnage. The timer was set for 5:25 p.m. This would mark the beginning of a killing spree that he hoped would spread fear and panic across the City of London.
And the bit you have to keep emphasising is that it's over his back and it's armed and it's ready to explode.
4:50 p.m. With the bomb armed, Copeland placed the bag outside a supermarket. As the countdown began, he left the scene, buoyed by the impending devastation that was about to be unleashed.
So after Copeland had left the device in the bag here, he walks off. The bag is now here for some minutes.
But Copeland hadn't accounted for the inquisitive nature of those walking by the unattended bag.
Someone came along, probably not concerned there was anything dangerous in the bag, but probably hopeful there was something valuable in the bag, and so they moved in.
They cross over Electric Avenue, still got the bag, and he puts the bag down here.
A number of passing people saw the bag and investigated it. In fact, at one point, someone took the bomb out of the bag and put it down.
The lethal weapon was now located amongst some packing materials on the side of the street.
So sitting on the pallet now is a plastic box containing explosives, batteries, a clock, and large quantity of nails.
It wouldn't have been clear to those passing by that the mystery package was in fact a live bomb, so many of the shoppers and stallholders remained in the area.
Behind me was a big skip with rubbish and other objects that were near it. The people that have found it are sort of almost hiding behind the skip, calling to each other. Some are coming to look at it, some don't know what to do, and they're trying to get a degree of shelter behind the skip.
At 5:25 p.m, almost 40 minutes after the bag was left outside the store, the bomb exploded. The nails ripped through the flimsy market stalls, hitting everyone in the immediate vicinity.
There's a van up here. The door of it gets blown partly off of its hinges. A car is just driving past the device over there, and that also gets caught in the blast.
Although the explosive itself wasn't huge, the fact that there were nails and shrapnel which goes and travels a great distance at great speed is what does the damage.
The first numbers started saying that there were 30 plus people injured. It went up to maybe 50.
Although no one had been killed, 48 were injured in the blast. As police began to assess the aftermath, fragments of the device were quickly recovered.
When a bomb goes off, it doesn't destroy itself. So recovered from the scene then was parts of the timing device, which we knew then to be a clock, and chemical tests that we knew that it was a flash powder consistent with coming from fireworks, that you can start building up the picture of how the device was made before it went off.
The bomb itself was clearly designed to kill and maim as many people as possible. It was not a sophisticated device, but you don't need to have a sophisticated device to kill people.
With little prior knowledge of explosives, Copeland had taught himself how to build the devices through the internet, using everyday items bought locally.
The black powder was bought from fireworks shops, and in fact on one occasion he had so many fireworks that he had to order a taxi to take him home to his bedsit. He had experimented to make sure that the bombs would work. He apparently experimented in his bedsit. He also set off one of the bombs on a common nearby, just to see that the thing would work.
Weeks of planning and preparation had paid off. The device had had the desired effect, and for now, Copeland had got away with it.
We had no intelligence, no information. My thoughts went straight to, well, who was it likely to be? And my biggest fear was what it turned out to be, a criminal lunatic with no real history in our world, certainly not in this sort of territory.
Several years before planting that horrific first bomb in Brixton Market, a teenage David Copeland had become increasingly isolated from those around him. At school, he failed to form any lasting relationships, preferring to spend his time as an invisible pupil, left to his own devices. Few would ever take any notice of him.
At the age of 17 or 18, he was drinking and taking drugs, drifting through jobs.
He didn't have a lasting relationship. He used prostitutes. Life, by his view, was tough.
By late 1995, an increasingly isolated Copeland was getting out of control. His drinking had increased, and he started to take a variety of drugs, including cocaine, crack and heroin. Unable to commit, Copeland drifted from job to job. Each new job he failed at strengthened a twisted sense of resentment towards the immigrant communities who he believed were stealing the best positions.
I think the British people have a right to defence. You know, the British people didn't ask these people over. They were brought over for the main reason is cheap labour. And then every white man now and woman has to work for cheap labour.
He's floundering at life while his friends and people who don't deserve to be as happy as him are clearly doing much better.
The 18th of April, 1999. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion that had ripped through the busy Brixton Market, police had begun a massive hunt to catch whoever had planned and prepared the device.
People were clearly scared, but unsure of exactly what this was.
The pressure on the service to catch the right person as quickly as possible is hard to describe. It was immense and it was intense.
Police today were maintaining a high profile in Brixton, asking anyone who may have been in the area on Saturday if they saw anything suspicious.
Electric Avenue and Brixton are flooded with police officers who have a questionnaire. Were you here? Did you see anything? To try and jog people's memories.
This guy clearly had been around for a bit. He must have been, to work out where he was going to place the bomb. He may well have made visits beforehand, and we may well have him captured on CCTV.
This borough had one of the best CCTV monitoring systems in London.
There were 26 cameras operating on that afternoon in the Brixton area. They set up teams of police officers to go through the CCTV on a 24-hour basis, continuously.
Throughout the week, the police investigation crawled forward. as specialist officers painstakingly reviewed several hundred hours of recovered CCTV footage.
In those days, it was physically recovering cassette tapes rather than relying on computer hard drives. So it was a big piece of work and a very big investigative line of inquiry.
Eventually, a breakthrough was made.
What emerged 5 days later, on the 23rd, was a very blurred image, which would eventually prove crucial.
They spotted someone coming out of a tube station, going into a tube station with a bag, without a bag. It was an opportunity that clearly could be developed.
The captured CCTV image, although not conclusive, was a major breakthrough for the investigation. Hopes were high for an imminent arrest and an end to the bloody carnage on London's streets. Just 2 days later, those hopes were dashed. On the 17th of April 1999, at 5:25 p.m, a bomb exploded, ripping through a busy Saturday market in Brixton, London. 48 were injured, but fortunately no one lost their lives. An investigation swung into action, and after hours of trawling through recovered CCTV footage, a blurred image of a potential suspect was discovered. However, despite this apparent breakthrough, the perpetrator remained one step ahead of the police and was already planning the second act of his ruthless spree. The 24th of April 1999, 3:10 p.m. Farnborough, Hampshire. Just 1 week after the Brixton bomb, David Copeland put the finishing touches to another explosive device. He then embarked on the now familiar 40-mile journey to the centre of London. This time, the target was Brick Lane. With a largely Asian population, this vibrant part of East London is generally packed with people going about their daily lives.
The community here at that time, mostly it were Bengali people.
Brick Lane is a market, if you like, similar to Electric Avenue, and it would have been full of market traders. It would have been packed with people out doing similar shopping.
Wearing identical clothes to the day of the Brixton attack, Copeland arrived in Brick Lane, but immediately realised something was wrong. The normally bustling streets were unusually quiet.
Saturday is the quietest day of the whole week, because a lot of the shops don't open on Saturdays. Sunday we are busy. Sunday is the market day.
Undeterred by his error, and with a bomb set to explode in a matter of hours, Copeland decided to go ahead with his plan, intent on continuing his spree.
Could he have taken the device away and come back another day? Yes, he could have done, but he decided to leave it armed, put it between two vehicles outside of a restaurant, just to see what injury or damage it caused.
Copeland's pattern of behaviour in planting his bombs was very simplistic. He wasn't interested in anything fancy or anything to show off his abilities. He just wanted to make as many victims as he could.
The bomb had been left in Hanbury Street, about 2/3 of the way down Brick Lane, between two vans. It was in a sports bag. A man picked it up and wondered what it was.
For a second time, Copeland had not counted on the inquisitive nature of the general public.
The guy who found the bag carried it 200 or 300 metres to his car, put it in the boot of his car, opened it thinking he'd found some tools, looked in, and with the publicity and his own belief, he then thought, has he got a bomb in a bag in his car?
Discovering the police station closed, the man left the bag in the boot of the car and went to alert the authorities. 5:54 p.m. Metres away from the parked car, local resident Makim Ahmed had just left his restaurant.
I was renovating my restaurant upstairs, and my daughter was with my wife, so she wanted to go shopping. So she rang me up and said, look, I'm coming over to keep Monique with you so that I can go out shopping. So I walked down the stairs, crossed over to the other side of the room, right? And as my wife was handing my daughter over to me, that's when it all happened. The sound was so horrendous, so big, I must have turned around to see what it was. But then for split seconds I thought it must be an earthquake, because I fell down with my daughter, but I clung on to my daughter. And then I realized that it was a bomb, and I could see the bonnet of the car flying up in the air.
As with the first bomb, this second device had been packed with nails.
Injured a number of passers-by and damaged a number of shops. But it had none of the disruptive power that the first bomb had had.
It was a big sound, it's a blast. It must have been heard miles. You know, the blast was very big. You know, how can I describe it? It's an awful sound, a deafening sound. But it all happened in split seconds.
I remember driving into Brick Lane and you could see the smoke. There was a mistiness, a fogginess around the street where the smoke was lingering.
There was confusion in the street, people crying, shouting, screaming, you know. And I can tell you that the nails traveled about at least 100, 200 feet right up behind us. You could see the nails, big nails.
There wasn't the level of casualties that we'd seen in Brixton the previous week, fairly superficial injuries.
Police didn't know what has happened. Nobody knew what really has happened, you see. Why it has happened, nobody knew. We were all frightened, we were all worried.
So there was a real anxiousness about this. You could feel it, you could sense it, that actually we were not out of the woods. This was a second attempt now. This was somebody very clearly on an agenda.
The second explosion, to some extent, of course, gives you more investigative leads to go on, more witnesses to interview, another forensic scene to recover, but it also creates more confusion and complexity.
In the space of just 7 days, 2 similar bombs had exploded in 2 separate minority communities of London. Although no one had been killed, another 13 people had been injured in the Brick Lane blast, bringing the total to 61.
Initially the thought was, in regards to Electric Avenue, was it terrorism? Was it extremism? Was it racism? When a second device goes off almost exactly a week later, then you do quickly start thinking, is there a link, is there a chain, and is there a connection?
They'd had an attack on a black area and now an attack on an Asian area. So the assumption had to be that they were dealing with somebody who would strike again.
So your aim was more than just to plant bombs and hurt people?
That's right, my aim was political, was to cause a racial war in this country.
Two years earlier, in the late spring of 1997, David Copeland, now 20 years old, had finally managed to secure a solid job as an engineer's assistant with the London Underground. The job paid well, but the work had meant moving from the comfort of his family home in Yateley to a shabby basic bedsit in the mixed-race community of Newham. Here, Copeland's increasingly racist views boiled over.
He began to take interest in political groups. He started off with British National Party.
For the first time, Copeland finds a group of people who are like-minded to him. They share very similar extreme views, and we know that support groups, like-minded individuals with extreme views, can be very seductive. It can be a very strong reinforcer.
Whilst attending meetings and activities for the BNP, Copeland became exposed to increasing amounts of far-right literature, including the Terrorist Handbook and the Turner Diaries.
Turner Diaries was an American novel written by a white extremist, a supremacist, and it told about the main characters and protagonists, how they plant bombs and start race wars, and eventually the white race becomes supreme.
But I am a Nazi, I admit that. Yeah, I believe in what I believe in.
Well, what do you believe in, son?
National Socialist State.
What does that mean?
It's the Aryan domination of the world. White races, the master race.
Copeland's abhorrent racist views became increasingly affected by what he read, and the literature served to shape his impressionable mind with ever more radical views.
He was able to develop the know-how to build very rudimentary but effective time-devised bombs, and this he began doing in his bedroom.
By 1998, Copeland had become disillusioned and frustrated by the BNP.
They were neither active enough for his liking, nor were they extreme enough. So he went to smaller groups that were more extreme.
Copeland very quickly joins another extreme group, the National Socialist Movement, and this was an underground group of right-wing extremists and white supremacists who believed that action and terrorism was the way to succeed with their political views.
Here, Copeland is said to have flourished with the like-minded members, and before long he had made inquiries with his superiors at the party about progressing through the ranks.
Copeland's involvement was possibly the first time in his adult life that he'd been successful at something.
On February the 25th, 1999, Copeland received a letter from the NSM. He had been promoted to unit leader for Hampshire and Wiltshire.
So he moved from group to group, becoming more extreme, lesser known but perhaps more dangerous groups, and he still wasn't satisfied. He took the decision to go it alone.
He was essentially a loner. Although he'd achieved a modicum of success in his views and membership of the extreme parties, he wasn't naturally a sociable person. He wasn't a team player. And he felt the need, possibly out of a need for security, to fall back to being a lone wolf operative.
Just 7 weeks after receiving his promotion within the National Socialist Movement, Copeland would embark on his spree, planting the first bomb that exploded through Brixton Market.
He built the bombs alone, he formed his plans alone, he went out alone, and he did the damage alone.
Thursday the 29th of April, Scotland Yard, London. 12 days after the first bomb exploded at Brixton Market, extensive work had been continuing on recovered CCTV footage.
The quality is pretty poor, and one of the best bits that we were slow to identify is on the Iceland camera that records people going into the shop, is where we get one of the best shots of the suspect. On the 29th of April, the best photos available, and there were 8 in all, were released to the media to see if he could be identified by anyone who knew him.
Police believed this was their man, a lone bomber attacking the minority communities of London, but they were still missing a motive for the attacks and were unsure if he was going to strike again.
One could feel the sense of urgency and the pressure we were under to get the right conclusion as quickly as we could.
Jack Straw, who was then the Home Secretary, made a public appeal urging people to stay calm, urging them to be cautious, and of course the police were urging everybody to be extra vigilant.
I think we all got worried by this. We thought some people are trying to get us. We all got together because we were all frightened of what was happening.
The concern and the fear was palpable. An entirely natural reaction to such an unpredictable and vicious assault on a completely innocent group of people simply going about their business. It's how terror works.
During later interviews, police would get to understand just how warped Copeland's motives really were by that stage.
Your intent was to really harm as many people as you can?
And the main intent was to spread fear, resentment and hatred throughout this country.
Friday the 30th of April, 10 a.m. The day after police released CCTV images to the media, David Copeland woke in a London hotel room. Having seen his image dominating the headlines and news bulletins, he knew his time was running out and had spent the night hurriedly preparing a third bomb.
He possibly knew from the very first bomb that he planted that his days of bomb planting would be finite and limited, which explains why he tried to do as much as he could in as short time as possible.
Meanwhile, the response from the released images had an almost immediate effect, and calls came flooding in.
You could be overwhelmed with calls from members of the public trying to be really helpful. As a consequence, within a very large number of people, there is the perpetrator.
One man, a cabbie, thought that he'd taken an individual who looked very much like the suspect in the picture to Brick Lane from Waterloo. So the police began to look at CCTV at Waterloo to see if there was any sort of match.
The lead proved positive, and a match was made with the Brixton CCTV footage. In both, he wore the same clothes and carried a similar distinctive black bag.
You have to understand that 500 calls are being received that are also identifying other suspects, and none of the suspects are identified twice.
Late that afternoon, police received another break.
And it's not until at about 5:25 that a phone call comes in that gives a name to the suspect.
One of David Copeland's workmates looked at the picture and began to think it bore a resemblance, and eventually, in the late afternoon, around about 5:30, rang the police to tell them that he was concerned about a workmate called David Copeland.
It was the first time David Copeland's name had been linked to the explosions.
Unfortunately, it was too late.
On the 17th of April 1999, 22-year-old David Copeland embarked on a vicious spree across London. The nation's capital was rocked by two massive explosions over a period of just 7 days. 61 people had been seriously injured. The police had several suspects identified, and the race was on to catch the killer before he struck again. As teams rushed to gather what information they could on their potential perpetrator, one suspect, David Copeland, was already standing at the bar of the Admiral Duncan in central Soho.
He was full of men, you know what I mean, all arguing up to each other and out kissing each other.
Indicate to me where you left the bomb.
I went up to get a drink, and I slipped off my shoulder and put it on the floor.
Around about 6:10, after standing there for some time, he said to a man near him, "Would you mind looking after my bag? I must get some cash. Can you tell me where the nearest cash point is?" He then disappeared and left the pub.
On the floor, inside the bag, the bomb ticked away.
Now he had decided to attack a gay area. It was something he felt quite personally about, and he always seems to have had a feeling since his teens that people thought he was gay when he wasn't gay.
He had the clearest recollection that as a child he watched the Flintstones TV cartoon programme, and the theme tune included the words, "You'll all have a gay old time," and he thought that he remembered his parents singing it, and they were effectively singing it at him as if they thought that he was gay. When he was selecting minority groups to target, maybe he had one reason for black people, maybe he had a similar reason for Asian people, each of them stealing his work, but maybe he had a special reason for gay people. This was really personal.
In a later interview, Copeland would attempt to justify his deep-rooted homophobia.
So how does the gay people fit in with your political beliefs then?
Because they're different, you know, I mean, they're wrong, they're perverted, they're degenerates.
At 6:30 p.m, the bomb exploded.
This was a particularly vicious attack because it was left in a crowded bar where the effect of the explosion would be even more devastating than the other two attacks.
The explosion didn't seem to spread out as you expect it to. It almost selected which people to injure. There were people further back than me that were injured, and I wasn't.
74 people were seriously injured in the blast. 4 would require amputations. Tragically, this time the blast was deadly enough to kill 3 people. John Light, Nick Moore, and a newly married Andrea Dykes were with a group standing close to the bag when it exploded. Andrea Dykes was 4 months pregnant at the time, with her first child. By now, Copeland had returned to his hotel room to watch as the events unfolded on the news. He calmly left, boarded a train back to Farnborough, and retreated to his room on Sunnybank Road. Across the country, individual police teams were frantically following up leads on the named individuals fitting the profile of the suspect caught on CCTV. Among those on the list was Copeland.
They decided very late that night to send a team of flying squad officers down there. They surrounded the house where he lived in a bedsit. And what they found was an extraordinary room decorated with a large swastika, pictures, cuttings from the first 2 bombs plastered on the wall.
He almost readily admits that he has been expecting them. He's the bomber, working alone, and it was as if it was just, he was waiting for it to happen.
With Copeland under arrest, during interrogation, he freely admitted to his crimes.
As you're aware, 3 people have died as a result of the device on Friday night.
I feel nothing. I don't feel sadness, but I don't feel joy. I'm sorry for the woman and the child. I think the woman was pregnant. I feel sorry for her. But I don't feel no guilt for the others.
He wanted to talk. He told us how he made the devices, why he did it, and it was driven by this part to being known. He believed in this Aryan state, and he was a racist.
Copeland's intention was to start a race war. Copeland wanted a reaction from the very communities that he was targeting. He thought the minorities would rise up, particularly if they made the mistake of thinking that he wasn't alone, that he was part of a bigger group, that worse lay ahead.
He said to the police that he didn't really mind being arrested and going to trial because it was his little moment of fame.
Before Copeland could be deemed fit to stand trial, assessments were made on the state of his mental health.
Some believe that he showed very strong florid symptoms of schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia. Other psychiatrists thought there was more evidence there of long-term personality disorder, paranoid personality disorder, which is not a mental illness in the way that we would know it today. So lots of conflicting psychiatric evidence. Ultimately, it suggested that he was bad rather than mad, and that he was going to face the full penalty for his crimes.
The trial to convict Copeland of murder and causing explosions began on the 5th of June 2000.
I remember coming in on the first day of that court case, court number 1 at the Old Bailey, perhaps the most famous courtroom in the world, and there in the rows were the victims, 1 or 2 in wheelchairs, others with obvious injuries, packed rows of people who'd suffered because of it.
On the 30th of June 2000, having lasted only 19 days, the trial was brought to a close. Copeland was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 3 of causing explosions. He received 6 life sentences.
Copeland was found guilty of the crimes he committed. Insanity was not a defence, and he will be detained for at least another 40 years. Whether he can be rehabilitated and made safe is something completely different.
There's nothing wrong with him whatsoever, other than he's a criminal, a terrorist and a killer.
It was a feeling of relief, really, that they caught up with him and they got him.
I don't think it ever completely goes away. It's always in the back of your mind somewhere, and there is always going to be something that triggers it.
He's a loner. He's the indefinable problem that police forces face. The undetectable attacker that can lurk somewhere out there.
In 2006, a postal building in California would come under attack.
One guy came in at 9 and started yelling at somebody shooting.
There was 4 of them, rapid succession. Pop, 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 pop!
The assailant, almost unique amongst spree killers.
That is extremely rare. Most women simply aren't that violent.
Jennifer San Marco would dispatch her victims with cold, deadly efficiency.
She didn't miss in shooting anybody.
As the clock ticked, the body count rose.
She literally walked up to them and shot them almost point blank.
And with it the question, why had this petite, middle-aged woman embarked on her ruthless killing spree? Santa Barbara County in California, one of the most desirable regions in the Golden State. Nestled between the city of Santa Barbara and the university campus of Isla Vista is the coastal community of Goleta.
Goleta is a great town, a great place to live.
It's nice. You know, they call Goleta, I guess, means the good land or whatever.
There's a very strong environmental element to the community, preserving open space, preserving the beach, preserving wildlife.
In the Goleta city limits, serious crimes against persons are a fairly rare occurrence. We only had 1 homicide in the last 14 years.
But on one day in 2006, the peace in Goleta would be shattered in a way no one was expecting.
January the 30th was a normal day here in the Bureau.
It was a clear day. It was unusually warm for that time of the year.
For most of Goleta's population, including the sheriff's department, the daylight hours had been relatively uneventful.
Made it through the entire shift, and it was pretty much a routine. About 5 p.m., is the end of our day, went home, did the stuff that I normally do when I get home, is family, dinner.
Deputy Clay Turner was one of a small team of officers scheduled for the evening shift.
Me and a couple of the other guys on the shift had earmarked a local place in town that we were going to grab our meal at. We ordered our meals, and we had just gotten our cups for us to fill ourselves with our drinks from the fountain when the call came out over the radio.
The 30th of January 2006, around 9 p.m., U.S. Postal Facility, Goleta. 911 calls began coming in from workers at the mail processing plant.
Sheriff's Department, how can I help you?
Yeah, there's the person that is shooting everybody.
There's somebody shooting? Copy 5 en route. This is the code 3 for a shooting at the post office.
I knew it was the real deal just by the tone of voice and what was going on. This has got to be righteous. This is not somebody dreaming this thing up. It's not firecrackers.
My coworkers start yelling through, oh my God, somebody call 911. And then, this suspect starts shooting her.
I can't imagine what the people in the restaurant were thinking, but we sprinted out the door and got into our patrol cars and started heading towards the call.
911.
Shots have been fired.
Okay.
We have 1 down for sure.
1 down?
At least.
Law enforcement rushed from all directions towards the large building, where hundreds of staff were employed, aware that many lives were potentially in danger.
I'm responding, but I'm talking with both cell phones to my ears, like I'm talking to different people, and steering with my knee. I had to get down here as quickly as possible.
How many people did you see get shot?
I saw one, and then, when I took off, I saw her, shooting somebody else.
What was going through My head was, if there was somebody that was on the loose inside that facility, knowing how big it was, my fear was the potential of finding many more people that had been shot and either wounded or killed on the inside.
Officers arriving were confronted by several employees fleeing for their lives.
Everybody started coming out, and they all were primarily running.
They were in absolute panic. They had lost it. There was no stopping them. They just wanted to get as far away on foot from that location as they could, and I mean, they're like running.
They basically came right down their main driveway.
It appeared that someone had begun shooting in the staff car park and then entered the building. But little more was known.
We didn't know if the shooter had left at that point or was still inside.
We were sorting through the crowd to try and find somebody who would know something. We were getting broken information as to what the suspect might be wearing: blue jeans, red shirt, dark hair, maybe a male, maybe female. And this is all within a matter of seconds of us pulling up that we're trying to do all this.
Who and where the shooter was were unknown, but one thing was clear. There were dead and dying postal workers at the scene.
When the deputies arrived, the first thing they did is tend to the people that were down in the parking lot.
We got into what they described as a diamond formation. I believe all of us were armed with AR-15s in addition to our sidearms. As we started transitioning down the sidewalk, the first victim I saw, she's looking right at me, but I knew she was gone.
Got 2 black tags, 2 red tags, and the place is still not secured.
Copy. So far, 2 black and 2 red.
I was in the newsroom, and we monitor the police scanner, and we heard a shots fired call. And it was pretty clear very quickly that it was a large incident, because there's certain phrases that they use regarding whether or not there's a dead body or an injured person. They use red tag and black tag.
In one of the aisles of the parking lot, I saw 2 more victims that were down. So me and the other guys, we breached, we went into the building.
Inside the door, the deputies discovered Postal Supervisor Charlotte Colton, shot in the head but still alive. Ahead of them, a corridor leading to the main warehouse.
You're taught to go to the sounds, the shooting, find the suspect, stop the suspect. Well, there's no shooting. All that's coming forth is the constant machine sound. And you could hear the phone ringing and ringing and ringing.
As news of the attack spread like wildfire among the postal workers, there were rumors about the identity of the killer, centering on an ex-employee.
All the witnesses, well, at least many of them, all had said that they recognized the shooter as being a former employee of the facility named Jennifer San Marco.
44-year-old Jennifer San Marco had worked at the Postal Service for around 6 years before leaving the job 2 years before.
When she first started there, she was fairly normal, about as normal as anybody else was. I talked to her on numerous occasions, because a lot of times when you're working side by side, you talk to people. And she was very, very intelligent.
She was fairly quiet. She worked at a case where she would get a tray of letters, and you know, what you would call pigeonholes, but you'd put them in like this. She was actually fairly attractive. I mean, when she first started, I'm sure some of the guys thought she was, she was a pretty good-looking girl.
She seemed, it was kind of both gregarious and a loner. She was one of those people you could, hey, Jennifer, how you doing? She, oh, hey, Robert, how are you? From across the aisle or something like that. And she was friendly, you could approach her, you could talk to her, but there was also a side to her that was kind of a little bit standoffish.
Now, 8 years later, the quiet former employee appeared to have the blood of her colleagues on her hands and was somewhere inside the giant sorting room. In January 2006, former postal employee Jennifer San Marco was on the loose with a gun. inside a giant sorting room in Goleta, California. Rushing to the scene, sheriff's officers followed a trail of bodies from the car park into the postal facility. In the entrance corridor, Deputy Clay Turner and his team discovered the seriously wounded postal supervisor, Charlotte Colton.
My number one goal at that point in time was to get the medical professionals in to cater to the two that were down in the parking lot, the one on the sidewalk just in case maybe I was wrong and she was still alive, and to deal with the still breathing Miss Colton.
Clay confirmed that we had 4 people down. He wanted 4 ambulances, and it was my plan to have 4 deputies to be basically the armed guard to go in with these rescue units, of which I ended up being one of the rescue units because we were down in staffing.
Although dreadfully wounded, Charlotte Colton appeared to be responding to the deputies that guarded her.
It almost seemed to us like her breathing became more calm and relaxed when we talked with her.
While Clay and his team provided cover, the rescue crews deployed.
The paramedic was supposed to check for signs of life. If there was signs of life, no treatment, no nothing, just get that person, put them on the gurney and get the heck out of there. And we did that pretty darn quick.
They were able to extract Miss Colton pretty quickly and transported her to the hospital.
4 casualties have been found in the car park and the entrance corridor. How many more were inside was uncertain. With the vast facility ahead, it was decided to wait for SWAT teams before entering.
They set up at the employee entrance door. At that point, they did not hear any shooting. So they determined it was not an active shooter, and now they pulled back and just contained the area.
They essentially waited for the cavalry to get there.
But just who was Jennifer San Marco, the architect of this chaos and catastrophe? And why had this middle-aged woman embarked on her deadly rampage? 1961, the 6th of December. New York, on the US eastern side, Jennifer San Marco was born. She grew up in the borough of Brooklyn.
We're between Avenue L and Avenue K on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, and this is across the street from Huddy Junior High School.
Jennifer sat next to me in a class. We had a lot of fun talking and laughing and not paying attention to class.
Schoolmate Thomas Hogue admits he had a crush on the friendly but quiet teen.
I thought that she was a catch. The cat's meow. To be honest with you, I thought she was attractive, she was nice.
Jennifer was always smartly dressed, very easygoing, quiet, able to laugh at jokes. I was kind of a class clown, so the people around us were always laughing, and she kind of joined in the laughter, but not so much in the dialogue.
There are a lot of gaps in her history. She grew up in Brooklyn. She went to high school there. She graduated in '78 from Edward R. Murrow High School.
Right here, we used to line these stairs and hang around, talk. After school, we would all congregate on the corner over there and then pick the activity. We'd play punch ball, which is a rubber ball, you hit it, and you run bases like baseball, and touch football, and the stick ball, stuff that's popular street games.
There was never any mention of any family or where she came from or anything like that. It seemed like it was almost kind of something that she didn't want to talk about, to me.
She had a distant family member that lived here in this county, and they were close at one time, back when they were growing up. But after the parents split up, then said that they grew distant over the time.
She was an outsider outside of that classroom experience that I had. I didn't hear her say a word boo to anybody else other than that. Other than, all I saw was passing in the hallway, and she was pretty much alone.
San Marco would eventually head out west to the sunshine of Santa Barbara County, where she would pass through jobs as a corrections officer, a police dispatcher, and a school catering assistant, before taking a position with the US Postal Service. There she would develop a reputation as a fast worker in the unique conditions of the vast Goleta facility.
The building, square footage-wise, is about the size of 4.5 American football fields.
A mail sorting center is all these boxes and parcels and letters are all coming into the central location, and then they're being parceled out. So there are these massive, loud machines.
The machines that sort letters, and they sort it to where when the carrier picks up his mail in the morning, it's all in order for him when he goes to deliver the mail. It's supposed to be. But there's still letters that the machine can't read, or they're too big or something, that people still throw mail by hand. We do that every night still.
The automation is fairly loud. Some people wear hearing protection. There are some operations where we can wear headphones and listen to a radio or a Walkman. There were plenty of times where I would listen to a book on tape just to help the time go by quicker and stuff like that.
Some people thought it was monotonous or whatever, but the postal work was, of all the work I've done in my life, that was the best work that I ever had. And it was a very educated workforce, because Santa Barbara's a nice place to live. It's pretty expensive, but the good benefits and the steady work of the Postal Service there were some brilliant people who worked there.
The young Jennifer San Marco had studied at one of the East Coast's flagship colleges. Now she was a full-time worker on the postal facility's late shift.
She used to come to work at 9 o'clock. A couple times she wasn't real friendly, and other times she was, it was kind of like night and day sometimes.
It soon became clear to her co-workers that all was not well.
At first, she'd be talking to herself in the cases where we threw the mail in. The conversations with her imaginary friend were fine at first. It was like, she'd be sitting there talking and talking and talking, and I'd say, "Hey, Jennifer, how you doing?" And she'd turn and say, "Oh, hey, Robert, how are you?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm doing great." But as time kept going on, it kept getting more and more angry, her conversations with her imaginary friend.
Jennifer's behavior was on a downward spiral and was becoming increasingly irrational.
I spoke to her one time when she was coming in, and she actually started yelling at me, and I didn't really talk to her after that.
I remember her coming in sometimes with lipstick on, where instead of putting on like most women do, she just across like war paint.
San Marco's home life also appeared to be unraveling.
She lived in a couple places in Santa Barbara. We talked to one landlord where she lived for about a year and a half, and she remembers having dinner with her. She described her as being really smart and vivacious and beautiful, and she couldn't believe that she was single. And then later on, she bought a condominium. That's where things started getting a little weird.
Jennifer, when she went off the deep end, would start chanting or singing Beatles songs out loud and out in the middle of the condo complex.
She would get into really heated arguments with her neighbor over noise.
San Marco shared a party wall with her neighbor, Beverly Graham.
Beverly Graham had lived in Santa Barbara for a really long time. She was a really sweet lady. She was a phone operator, I think, for the gas or electric company. She was a really pleasant woman.
The loud music led to a call to the sheriff's office.
The deputies went out for a noise complaint. The noise went down, and the deputies cleared the call and went on for the rest of their duties.
But Jennifer San Marco would not forget the incident, and at work, she became increasingly odd.
Got to the point where she wouldn't acknowledge anybody, talk to anybody, whatever, just like ignore everybody, but she still did her work.
After 6 years working at the postal facility, things came to a head when she made a disturbing comment to longtime co-worker Dexter Shannon.
She said to Dexter Shannon something about a woman, a former employee that they knew mutually, who committed suicide. And there was something in that prompted Dexter to go to his supervisor and say, "Hey, I'm concerned about her."
I wasn't working too far away, but you could hear some yelling, and so everybody's kind of looking to see what's going on. She wouldn't go into the office, and they had to call in some law enforcement.
Suddenly, all hell breaks loose. Jennifer goes flying by with the cops in tow.
It was kind of scary. It took two guys to, actually holding her legs and her arms and get handcuffs on her. They had no other choice.
The deputies handcuffed her and waited for a representative from the mental health assessment team. And that team made the determination to commit her for a 72-hour involuntary hold per 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code.
I figured I wouldn't ever see her again.
We know that she was examined. We know that ultimately that there was a psychologist that was examining her and that did make a diagnosis to her and that she refused treatment. And part of the problem that she had was a failure to admit that she had a problem.
San Marco clearly had a history of problems that would be the hallmark of a descent into some serious mental health problem. So she was clearly an individual who was suffering psychotic delusions and intrusive thoughts, and her behaviour was becoming more removed from reality.
After her ejection from the Postal Service, San Marco was retired on health grounds. Little did her colleagues know that Jennifer San Marco would one day return with murder in mind. Over a 6-year period working for the US Postal Service in Goleta, California, Jennifer San Marco's odd behavior had escalated to the point that she was forcibly removed from the building and retired on health grounds. It's thought she decided to head back towards her family in the East, but it seems fate had something else in store.
She packs her pickup truck, she drives east on Route 66. Her car essentially breaks down, and that's why she settled it in Milan.
Grandson Milan area is really small, just not a lot really to do in the area unless you go outside, to sightsee.
New Mexico, flat land, not a lot of grass and a lot of trees and shrubbery, a lot of dirt, kind of desolate.
We have the mountains around. Smaller towns like Milan are very remote.
If you want to live somewhere where it's nice and quiet, it's a place to be.
Selling her apartment in Goleta, San Marco decided to buy a property in the desert town. Abel Ortega supplied the fuel for her home.
She was real good looking. She had long hair, and she was really nice. And we always, we'd take her gas, and she'd come in the next day or whatever and pay for it. She lived in an A-frame house right behind the office here, and she had a 250-gallon tank, and she was a very good customer.
It was just your standard 2-story, single-family home, standard backyard, but then as the land went out farther, it was kind of desolate and desert type.
San Marco would be a regular visitor to the village administrator's offices, where she would become somewhat fixated with employee Sonia Salazar.
For that first year, she came in, she would just pay her bill. She was pretty normal, just a normal customer. As she would go in, she would ask for me. Or if I wasn't there in the office where she could see me, she would be looking for me because my coworker would say, she asked for you, and if I wasn't there, she would just look for me, and then they would help her the best they could, and then she would leave.
But after around 12 months, Jennifer San Marco began to noticeably change.
Probably after a year, she came in with a short, spiky haircut.
It looked as though she had taken scissors to her hair. It was not a haircut. It was obviously something she had done to herself.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Just fine.
I can help you here.
And her dress was completely different. She looked like a different person. But through that year, she wasn't as nice to me anymore. And if I wasn't there, she wouldn't even let them help her. She would just leave.
She'd go up to the cash register and she says, I came to pay my bill. And so I'd look it up and, you know, and I say, well, you don't know nothing. And she'd look to her right and she'd say, see, I told you that I didn't owe a bill, that I had already paid it. And she'd have a little discussion there, you know, with her imaginary friend. And then she'd look like that and she said, okay, well, thank you very much, she says, and then she'd leave, you know.
She would go to grocery stores and she would buy stuff, and that she would just, when she would leave, she'd go out and throw it in the trash, including the money. And that was, and the same, she would buy liquor at other stores and just throw it in the trash.
San Marco entered the village offices, wishing to apply to publish a series of documents she'd written.
I was sitting at my desk and she sat across from me, and that's when, you know, I noticed that there was something wrong. She was arguing and using foul language, but not towards me. So she would ask me a question, and as I was answering her question, she was then arguing with someone that was not there, in other words. Jennifer had wanted to apply for a business license, which was actually a business that she would name the Racist Press.
The title of the publications struck a chord with her former Brooklyn schoolmate, Thomas Hogue.
So this was largely an Italian neighborhood at the time, totally changed now. But in the 70s, this is largely Italian, and most of the people that I were hanging out with were Italian.
They started the phenomenon of busing, where young children of color were brought from other neighborhoods into our neighborhood.
The thought was to alleviate crowding in the slums, so to speak.
And that caused a little racial strife. So it was a kind of turbulent a little bit. There was some free flowing use of the N-word, and it was a new thing for people in the neighborhoods to experience, so it was a bit uncomfortable.
The only thing that I saw that was of interest to note is that she was part of that whole crew where people were threatened in the neighborhoods by change, and the busing in of people from different neighborhoods, different color.
But despite its inflammatory title, San Marco's Racist Press was far from a bigoted tirade.
I pledged my life to defend the premise of democracy in this country, and could not in good conscience pay for or justify a politically motivated racist murder. Not one or 1,000.
There were 5 volumes of the Racist Press. In reading them, I was expecting to see something more overt. I thought that she would come out and start making disparaging remarks against anybody of color or any type of religious backgrounds. A lot of it was just hard to understand.
The documents alluded to an elaborate conspiracy theory.
The United States government functions as a white supremacist affiliate, embracing Nazi German dogma.
She thought that the government was somehow controlling people, in cahoots with the KKK. She made a link to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and that all of those things were sending messages to people to commit murders.
A government conspiracy, psychics, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show? It sounds absurd for a sophisticated nation using this format as a legitimate, plausible strategy.
As 2005 continued, San Marco's neighbors in New Mexico noticed her going downhill rapidly.
I did know of the time that she had stripped at a local gas station.
Right back here at the edge of the building over here, she would get on her knees and start like praying, you know, and she'd be, you know, with her hands up like this and that, and start praying, and, you know, found it kind of weird.
We clearly know that when individuals have got severe mental health problems, having a significant other there to share your worries, to get advice from, to talk about your symptoms, is clearly much more beneficial than individuals who are on their own. we see individuals who are isolated go down this descent spiral very quickly.
However, there may have been another element playing on San Marco's mind. July 1976, New York City. Serial killer, the son of Sam, begins a campaign of violence on the streets of the metropolis.
In the past year, a psychopathic gunman has killed 6 people and wounded 8 others in New York City. He calls himself Son of Sam.
You know, she grew up there, she was aware of this, she mentions it in her writing.
Over a 12-month period, postal worker David Berkowitz had preyed on young New Yorkers, shooting them with a handgun and spreading panic throughout the city.
You had this guy going around randomly killing people, and they had no idea what this was about. And I think if you were a young person, a teenager, particularly a girl, it would have been terrorizing.
And it appeared San Marco, a petite young woman of Italian descent with long dark hair, fitted exactly what New Yorkers believed to be the son of Sam's preferred target.
People were very nervous, apprehensive. Girls cut their hair, changed the color. Streets were empty. Everybody was just terrified. Had no idea where it was going to pop up next.
For journalist Scott, there are too many parallels in the two tales to ignore.
David Berkowitz was a postal employee who believed that a dog was giving him messages to kill people. Jennifer San Marco was a postal employee. She apparently talked to animals. She thought birds were giving her messages.
The notorious 70s killer also featured in San Marco's writings.
Fact. The post office employed David Berkowitz in the 1970s during his infamous reign of terror as what the media dubbed the Son of Sam killings. Was David Berkowitz a psychotic or psychic killer?
The son of Sam would go on to shoot 6 victims dead and injure more, before being captured in 1977, when Jennifer San Marco was 16. 28 years later, in 2005, San Marco would take the parallels one stage further, when she bought a handgun of her own.
The semi-automatic handgun that she had, she purchased from a pawn shop in New Mexico, and waited a 15-day waiting period, and went and picked it up. And at that point, also bought 200 rounds of reloaded 9mm ammunition.
Both these actions, again, are perfectly rational and cogent, so she clearly had periods where she was able to be in touch with reality and certainly knew what she was planning on doing far in advance.
In the backyard, there was a lot of some target practice. Like, you can tell that she or somebody had been out there shooting a gun, practicing on shooting targets. Not knowing how far and how far she was from the target, you could tell that whoever was shooting was a good shot.
And San Marco was about to use her skills to deadly effect. In 2003, after displaying bizarre behavior, postal worker Jennifer San Marco had been forcibly removed from the Goleta sorting facility where she worked and retired on health grounds. She had resettled in New Mexico, where her behavior had become increasingly strange. Now the 44-year-old was about to bring vengeance down upon her former workplace. At the end of January 2006, Jennifer San Marco got in her truck and headed back to California. Sometime just before the start of the 9 p.m. shift change, Jennifer San Marco arrived at the Goleta postal facility.
She drove all the way here from New Mexico in one trip. Knew when shift change was going to be, timed her arrival at the gate.
In order to get through the first security system, San Marco tailgated another vehicle and entered the staff car park.
She parked her truck, backed into the stall, about 100 feet from the employee entrance door.
But still, you need a badge to get in the front door.
San Marco held up an employee at gunpoint and demanded he hand over his pass, which would provide electronic access to the secure staff entrance.
And then she told him, okay, now get out of here. And, of course, he took off.
Although she had spared one employee, it wouldn't last. In the car park, San Marco encountered 37-year-old Z. Fairchild and shot her in the head.
She didn't miss. It's pretty steely on her part to be able to do that.
San Marco was seen approaching the staff entrance before turning towards 28-year-old Malika Higgins and shooting her.
She literally walked up to them and shot them almost point blank.
Just outside the employee entrance, San Marco encountered and shot 42-year-old Nicola Grant.
When the shooting was occurring out in the parking lot, there was a couple employees that were in a break room, which was adjacent to the parking lot. And they heard what sounded like gunfire. And they looked out the window. They didn't see her shooting anybody at that point. But she said that she looked at them and smiled.
Jennifer San Marco then entered the building, where around 80 people were working.
It was somewhere near 9 o'clock when I heard the first loud report, and it was very loud. You have as much automation as we have running and the other machines and that going on. It's very loud in there, but this thing was loud.
I had heard some noises, and I thought, we have these things that sometimes a mail comes in on, they're called a pallet.
If you stand them up straight up and then you let it fall, when it hits the ground, it makes a very loud report. So a lot of us thought it was just a pallet dropping. So I expected when I looked up, one of my mail handling friends would be there saying, boy, you really get into your work or something like that. What I saw was one of my coworkers grab a female employee, throw her to the side, point to the door, and yell, run.
The one guy came in at 9 and started yelling at somebody shooting. You kind of think, oh, yeah.
Despite workers' disbelief, the situation was very real. San Marco had made her way deeper into the complex. There she would shoot 44-year-old supervisor Charlotte Colton.
She was a beautiful woman physically, but that beauty went way more, it wasn't just skin deep or whatever. She was a bright light in this town that was snuffed out.
One of Charlotte's colleagues dragged her into the entrance corridor, where Deputy Clay Turner later discovered her. But Jennifer San Marco was not finished.
The first shot, there was a pause of about 3 or 4 seconds. Then I heard 2 more shots, pop, pop.
She made her way towards her old workstation.
52-year-old Lupe Schwartz must have seen San Marco coming, but she couldn't save herself.
And there was a pause of about 1 or 2 more seconds, and there was 4 of them in rapid succession. Pop, 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 pop! And that was when I caught some movement in the peripheral vision to my left side, and I heard somebody yell, go, go, go.
Grandfather Dexter Shannon was wearing headphones. He never heard San Marco coming and was shot dead at point-blank range.
Dexter had a bunch of kids and grandkids, but he had served in the Air Force and had been in Vietnam himself.
Oh, he was a very nice man. I never heard Dexter say an unkind word about anyone.
After shooting 6 of her former co-workers, Jennifer San Marco used her handgun to take her own life.
She was laying on the floor in a prone position, and she still clutched the weapon in her hand. So we had to pry her fingers away from the trigger and away from the grip of the gun to get it out of her hand. It was still loaded and cocked and ready to be fired.
Most spree killers want to commit suicide. They believe that this life is not worth living. They're so miserable and they don't see a way out. But first they want to get even with everyone responsible for those miseries. So that's why they engage in a killing spree first, and many of them are suicidal.
For all those involved, the enormity of what had happened began to sink in.
Like it wasn't even real, until I saw somebody who was actually, laying dead on the sidewalk. I knew that it was real.
4 had died at the scene. 2, including Charlotte Colton, who deputies had desperately tried to comfort, died in hospital.
Deputies were reassuring her and talking to her the entire time.
I just wish we could have gotten her sooner. Because all of us want to prevent destruction and prevent anyone having to feel that kind of pain of losing a loved one.
But this shocking tale was not yet over.
I had just arrived home, and I was laying down, and when my phone went off again, and it was my lieutenant telling me that we had another homicide.
The victim was San Marco's former neighbor, Beverly Graham, who hadn't been seen since the previous day.
Hi, my girlfriend's dead. Please send somebody right away.
We had a homicide reported, and we staged in this area, getting ready to make entry into the apartment.
Miss Graham's boyfriend was the one who discovered the decedent, Miss Graham.
It became clear that before Jennifer San Marco had made her assault on the postal facility, she had decided to settle a score with the neighbor who had complained about her loud music.
The wall you see is the area where San Marco had access to the rear of the apartment. There was hair pulled from somebody's head that was scattered across the coffee table and around the apartment, and there were things that were kind of in disarray.
Jennifer San Marco's deadly spree had cost the lives of 7 innocent people. But the question remained, why?
For San Marco, a woman whose life had been disintegrating slowly around her, I think this was her last roll of the dice. I think the realization that she'd hit rock bottom was perhaps the trigger point that then allowed her to listen to her paranoid beliefs and conspiracy theories.
Most women simply aren't that violent. Her killing spree must have come from a profound belief that her job meant a tremendous amount to her.
There was nothing any of these people did. I mean, even when you look through these weird slights that she was documenting, there was nothing any of these people did that caused them to be targeted in some way.
Whatever her perceived motivations, Jennifer San Marco's ruthless killing spree had devastated countless lives and changed a community forever.
Every time I come to this intersection, very rarely do I not think about that night.
In the days and weeks that unfolded, we got to see and hear more about the victims and their families, and
this by far was the dark part of my career.
There isn't a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about what happened that night, or who we lost, or the friendships that we shared, or anything.
Yeah, I think about it quite often when I walk in the front door. You know, it was a pretty big deal.